G'day. Today's video is going to be a little bit different. On a previous clip I think I was putting strange angles on sheet metal. Someone commented about the toolbox that I showed at the end, and I thought, well, I didn't film all that, but I've got a few photos and I can probably point out a few of the salient features, so I thought that might be an interesting thing to do. So yeah, it'll have a few stills in there, it'll have a few voiceovers, all that sort of thing, a bit different, but hopefully it'll still be something worth watching. Here it is, the thing I refer to as the bling toolbox. I guess one of the first questions is, why stainless steel and why this size? The size is actually dictated by a filing cabinet. I want to be able to put it in a filing cabinet drawer, so that's the width of a filing cabinet drawer, and that's the height of a filing cabinet drawer. And that was just so I could lock it away at night. I didn't want to have it necessarily sitting in an office, because it's portable enough that it can be taken out. The reason for stainless steel and for the whole shape was just that at the time I was looking at working in a food factory, and so they like stainless steel because it's hygienic and all that sort of thing. And so in here there are all my bits and pieces for adjusting things and tweaking things and measuring things. So that's it was basically built to take all my odds and sods. Just about everything on here is has been made, including the slides here. These are actually inspired by my normal toolbox. They're a recurved piece of sheet metal like that, two hat-shaped pieces back to back, and then another piece the same as this on the other side, and they slide together. I had to make up a bit of special tooling for the pan brake to be able to form these. And these ones, I think I had to use a bench forming device. I'll have to see if I can find some photos of those. They fasten onto the trays with a bolt here and a bolt here. This one is just a straight nut and bolt. The one back here screws into a block, and the block is part of the slide limiting mechanism, so it won't go out any further than that. So in terms of a section through the slide, if I have the slide like that and I take a section through, this is what it ends up looking like. So the bolt is through there, the screw comes through from here and anchors into that block. These are welded onto the hatch sections, and then back in here, same sort of thing applies. A lot of the welding was done with stainless MIG wire. I originally started off with some 1.6 standard TIG wire, but because this material is only 0.7 thick, I found that just didn't work, and so on the advice of a couple of people, I got some stainless MIG wire, and that worked a lot better. For a number of these joints, for me to be able to weld them successfully without back purge, I made up some aluminium blocks like this, and they'd sit into the corners. This one isn't actually for this corner, but they'd sit in the corners there, and as well as helping control the heat around here, it also meant that I didn't have to worry so much about the oxygen getting in to the back there and causing that horrible black stainless bloom that you get. I've still got a few instances of that around the place, but they're nowhere near as bad as they could be. This is a little blurry, unfortunately, but I've got two sets of spring catches on here. I've got these ones up here, which I use for securing the front panel. I've also got these ones here. These are a bit of an afterthought, because I realised that once I had that panel in place, it wouldn't necessarily come out by itself. So I've got one of these on each side, which just act as a little bit of a pusher, so that when the catches up the top are released, the springs here then pop that panel out enough that you can open the front of the box. Once again a little bit blurry, but the catches all are the same basic idea. It's a section rolled up, bit cut out in the middle, there's a spring, and then there's a roll pin just to make sure the spring pushes in the right direction. The lock on here is an interesting thing. It started off as just as a cheap round barreled arrangement. I decided after all the angular surfaces on here that didn't work, so I made up an outside barrel. I think I had to use a file to put the indentations for the tumblers there. But basically it's the same lock as you can buy in a shop, but just I made up a different outside for it. The fastening method, as you can see, is pretty much still the same. The front panel, as you can see, just slides out, hinges up. It's purely for security reasons. Then the catches up here hold that in place. These are just a little brass rod that I've got in a carrier, and in there you can probably just make it out. There's just a little rail for them to slide in. I discovered that when I made this, I didn't think about this terribly much, and so it has to be right back for the bottom drawer to come out. If I have it sitting up there like so, it just hits. So a bit of CAD work went into this, but probably not as much as I should have had. Some of you may remember the dimple die clip that I put together. One of the reasons for doing that were these bolts. These bolt the hinge on. I figured it was probably a little bit awkward to have the hinge weld on both sides. So the bottom is welded but the top is bolted. But what I used there was I then went and used the dimple dies to put a dimple in here, turned the head of a bolt down, put it in there, welded it up, and then ground it flush. So effectively made up a stud. Some of the welding on this project was done using a spot welder, this one. Now spot welding is more but correctly called resistance welding because it relies on the resistance of the material between the electrodes, and stainless steel is excellent for that because it's got a higher electrical resistance than steel. Key to success for spot welding is making sure that the tip of the electrode is clean, and particularly with a low power welder like this one, is small so that you get the high current density. So you've got to make sure your tips are addressed. That doesn't mean you can't have special shaped tips for getting into odd places, but that's just one of those things about these sorts of devices. You have to have a small tip, so you might have to have lots of little spots rather than one big one and hope it to hold. But apart from being very heavy, these things do a nice job on stainless. As part of the construction, the bottom of the case, you can just see there, I creased that to give it a bit more stiffness and rigidity. I found otherwise that when I welded the corners there that it'd tend to pop down, and so it was rocking around. So by putting that crease in there and then doing the welding, I was able to overcome that one. Most of the parts on this were probably made twice, or at least the major parts, and the reason for that, well, there were two reasons there. One was that I'd get halfway through and discover I'd got it wrong, but the other reason was that I was given some sheet which I was told was stainless, but it was actually plain steel with a lacquer on it, and it wouldn't weld and caused me no end of grief until I worked out what the problem was. So some parts had to be made a couple of times just to get around the problem of the material. In terms of tools used, as well as the pan brake, this was probably the most important one. Slicing up that much stainless by hand is not much fun. I did use some tin snips and other things at some stages, but the joggling tools, the brakes were the main things that were used to bring this project to fruition. So in terms of lessons learnt with this project, I guess the main was that I learned how to weld stainless steel a lot better. I discovered that the current setting I initially was using was too high, and was able to drop that down, and these days my rule of thumb is something like an amp per thou of thickness, and then drop that by about 20% for stainless, and that seems to work a bit better. This is a heavy toolbox. Empty it probably weighs 9-10 kilograms, full it weighs about 12, and that's simply that all that sheet metal adds up. Now when you start thinking about, well, should I have made out of plastic, that's not much better, because once you start getting up into thicknesses for plastic which are decent, reasonable strength, very soon you run into the same sort of problems of weight. The killer is probably all the drawers I had in there, but that's what I wanted, so I have to live with the drawbacks. Another one that was very important, I discovered, was the fit up of the welds. If you have the slightest gap with material that thin, it causes you all sorts of problems, and so I very soon learnt that I had to be very careful with my joint fit up, preferably have the things touching, have it seriously clamped so it wouldn't move, and then it was, well, relatively easy. So there we go. So I hope this has been of interest to people. Thanks to Tate for suggesting it, and yes, we'll see what we can come up with next time.